to begin to at least have departments in the 1033 program with the federal government that supplies military surplus equipment to our departments, and also begin to give back some of the military surplus equipment that we deem should not be used in our communities. So we have a full list of that, what that equipment is. We're happy to talk through that, but really it's to demilitarize for our communities. I know this is an issue that has popped up across the country, but in our state specifically, you know, we have a lot of departments that are accepting equipment that I think, you know, we shouldn't be using in our communities.
What type of equipment, what departments are you talking about?
Well, mainly a lot of the departments in the urban spaces. We also have, you know, a lot of departments taking equipment that I think, like armed vehicles, for example. One component we did change in the bill was to remove armored vehicles, because we think having vehicles that are bulletproof, that need to go into, you know, tough spaces where they need to protect the officers inside is important. But armed vehicles, armed helicopters, essentially tanks, are not something that we think should be used. So we are going to be removing that. Also grenades and long-range acoustic devices like LRADs are something we shouldn't be using, we believe, as well. And then anything that's like rocket launchers. We have a lot of different just equipment that we think is used in war zones, essentially. Obviously, tear gas is another component of the bill that we're banning outright. But I think a lot of this equipment is just, you know, it has been banned in certain places by the military, so we shouldn't be using it in our community.
So talk about the difference between armed vehicles and armored vehicles, because there is a difference.
Yeah, so essentially armored vehicles is something that's, again, like if you could have a Hummer that's bulletproof, or one of the regular police vehicles or cars that's bulletproof. So anything that protects the individual inside is armored. Armed is something where there is guns attached to it, to the vehicle, or to the helicopter, and there's space for an officer to essentially use the vehicle as a deadly weapon. And so we are prohibiting that based on this bill. At least through committee, we've made that point.
Okay, and there's something else that you guys have on there, a mine-resistant ambush protected vehicle, or an MRAP. The one in Spokane County, this one is an armored vehicle. There's no gun mounted to it or anything like that. Why would that one still be under this bill if it's considered an armored vehicle?
So we have said in the bill, we made an affirmative statement that said if you're using a vehicle that's armored for search and rescue purposes, to go into a space where you need you need that vehicle, that's okay. But with the MRAPs, these vehicles are, you know, the vehicles that we see going to Fort Lewis McChord down in South King County or Pierce County, where they're military vehicles. They're essentially they're tanks, and they're not regular vehicles. So even though they do have an armored component to it, they still have the space on the top of the vehicle where an officer can come out, essentially still be in the vehicle, but come out and have a gun and shoot down at whomever they're shooting at. So we want to prevent that from happening, and prevent, you know, a lot of these vehicles are used in demonstrations and some of the protests that we saw over the summer, especially the MRAP. So we want to make sure that that's prevented.
And you're saying that they can come out the top and possibly shoot somebody, but with another armored vehicle, say for like a Bearcat, for example, those just have the doors on the side, but they can easily, you know, possibly get one where you can come out on the top and shoot someone. Isn't that almost like the same thing though? Wouldn't the Bearcat then be essentially banned, even though it's an armored vehicle?
Well, the Bearcat, it would. I know that there is a representative that wants to prevent Bearcats from being banned, Representative Clippert, And, you know, he has some law enforcement experience and has been kind of explaining what Bearcats are being used for. Again, what I told him was, if these vehicles are being used for the purposes of search or rescue or anything like that, then they would be allowed in our bill. But essentially, we want to get rid of any vehicles that are going to go into a large crowd or into a neighborhood that could, you know, I guess, be the aggressor in the sense of an officers using it as a deadly weapon. And so, yeah, so essentially, unless we make that exception, it would be banned in our bill.
For the MRAP, and I know you can talk about this because Spokane County does have one of these vehicles. I mean, they can use it for a hostage situation, an active shooter at a school shooting. Shouldn't they have the ability to be able to possibly shoot someone if they're inside? I know this sounds morbid, but killing kids in, you know, an active shooter situation?
Well, I think, you know, obviously if you're in a, just like what we're doing with banning chokeholds and neck restraints and things like that, if you're in a deadly situation where people around you or the officer themselves, there's a dangerous or imminent, serious or imminent threat is the language that we use, then kind of all bets are off. But I think what we want to do is begin to at least decrease the amount. One thing I did over the summer was look at the amount of military equipment that's in all the departments across our state. And there was a lot, and especially in our urban departments, there's just a lot of military equipment that community has said has not produced good outcomes. I mean, a lot of these equipment are used for SWATs, for DV response as well, and or drug detection response. And I just don't think that it enhances public safety for people around the situation when they go in like that, and innocent bystanders get hurt. And I think, you know, again, all bets are off in a life or death situation, just like any other method or tactic. However, we want to begin to decrease this use, and we think that prohibition for some of this equipment is the only way to do that.
Including the MRAP?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you also have silencers in this bill, which a lot of the law enforcement agencies have been correcting me on it and calling them suppressors. Why use the terminology silencers, and also why ban silencers or suppressors?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is one of those situations where we're being educated in the process about the different tactics or the different equipment. Silencers versus suppressors, I've been told, are actually different things. The suppressors we will allow. I think the silencers that can be used on military style assault rifles, and I think those should not be allowed. But I think the suppressors that simply suppress the sound in a situation where you have to, you know, again, go in a life or death situation, are allowed. But we want to ban the military assault rifle silencers that can be used, and that's something that probably will stay in the bill. But I think what we'll probably do is have an affirmative statement that says suppressors are allowed, because there's been a lot of confusion on that, and that's definitely something we don't want to prevent.
Okay, yeah, because that was, again, when I was being corrected on the differences between those, it was a little confusing about that part. And some of the stuff in here, rockets, rocket launchers, bayonets, grenades, do you know what departments have these? Because I was looking at the DLA and I didn't see anybody with a bayonet. I was kind of shocked that was in there.
Well, I definitely, there is a list that's, I believe it's actually publicly accessible through the 1033 program, at least, what equipment that departments get. But some of this equipment isn't being currently used. It's just being stored. And unfortunately, when you store a lot of this equipment, it also takes up a lot of space. For example, Representative Orwell has a bill around sexual assault kits, and some departments are saying they simply don't have the space for it. However, we're storing some of this military equipment for years that we never use, and it takes up space. And, you know, I think, you know, in some cases we shouldn't be having it if it's not something that we're using. So, you know, I think a lot of it is simply being stored. It's not being used necessarily, but I think we just need to make sure that our departments don't have it at their disposal for some of this equipment that I think, again, shouldn't be used in our communities.
And some of this stuff that they're getting from this DLA program, I mean, some of it on there seems a little excessive, but it's not in the bill. Like, for example, the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, I was counting in Washington, and they have the most equipment out of any department in the state. I mean, they have a 7.62 millimeter rifles, 5.56. They got more than 1,000 magazine cartridges. Why do you think a department has so much stuff? I mean, some of the stuff on here, you know, an ATV, a toolkit, medical kit.
Yeah.
That's fine to have, but in your mind, there's like sniper scopes on here.
Yeah.
Do you see anything necessary that, you know, should be on this list? Like I said, there's a ton on here.
You know, again, we did have that paragraph in the bill that says this is the equipment that is gained through the 1033 program that we think should be allowed. A lot of protective gear, even camouflage clothing, you know, any search and rescue equipment. But some of this equipment, I like you said, I think it's, again, stockpiling just because we can get it. And just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I think a lot of the equipment, again, if it's not being used, then there's no point in storing it. And if it is being used, some of it shouldn't be allowed in our communities. And a lot of what you just said, I just think is not equipment that should be used in our communities at this point in 2021, when there's other less lethal alternatives that have been, you know, supplied for our officers. We talk about you can use flashbangs, you can use rubber bullets, you can use, you know, different types of less lethal alternatives, tasers, obviously. Instead of the LRADs, we're allowing PA systems that are, you know, used during demonstrations. So I think we just have to have those less lethal alternatives made available as much as possible. And I know it's different across some departments. Seattle, Tacoma, and Spokane have rubber bullets. I talked with the mayors of Kenton, Federal Way, and Auburn, and they said they didn't. And so we have to make sure that we are, as a state, providing that supply of less lethal alternatives that we do think should be responsible.
So with this bill, would departments still be able to get some military equipment like helicopters and Bearcats and stuff like that?
They would, yeah. So any armored helicopters or Bearcats that don't have the component where you can attach a gun, essentially armed, you can still get through this program. And that was a change we made in our proposed sub and committee bill, which will come to the floor. So I'm sure that military equipment list will also be discussed on the floor when we have this bill come to the House. I'm expecting pretty long debate on a lot of these topics. So I think that military equipment list will get further refined, because I'm sure there's equipment that we didn't list that shouldn't be there or should be there and will be brought up by other members.
What things do you think will be taken off or added on there, or do you think the most contested?
I think the MRAPs will continue to be a point of discussion. LRADs, again, the long-range acoustic devices, I talked with the manufacturer of them in California, and they had this data about how they're so safe and this and that, yet there's opposing data out there that says the exact opposite. So that's basically it's the equivalent of looking into the sun for your ears and for a long period of time, and you could pretty much go deaf. So I think we have to be careful and do a lot of research from now until this goes to the floor, because this is going to come up and we're going to have to make quick decisions. And you know, I think those two in particular will be points of differences. I also think the military list itself, some members will just not like the fact that they can't, the departments can't get these items even to store. So, you know, demilitarization is an ongoing conversation. And I think, you know, Campaign Zero has been great, been working with them DeRay McKesson, who's a BLM activist across the country, has supplied information on that. Been working with Washington Coalition on Black Lives, Washington for Black Lives. And this is the list that they say community does not want these items in our communities any longer. So that's where this came from.
Do you think these items cause distrust in communities?
I do. I really do. I think, unfortunately, over the years, there has been a warrior-like mentality that just from the way officers come in to community and the guardianship of the community component of the police has not been viewed the same in certain communities, especially Black or brown communities. And I think it's something we have to change. And I'm hoping that this bill gets closer to that. And again, I am working with law enforcement. I've talked with mayors from again, a lot of cities across our state, state agencies, and some of this list they actually agree with. They're like, oh, I didn't even know that some departments had this. We shouldn't have it. So I think there is some agreement. It's just, we just have to really go through this list with a fine tooth comb and figure out what the best possible list is going to be.
Why bring this bill forward now? I mean, this has always been a long-standing issue, but has this been fueled more by everything that we saw in 2020?
I think I will say that some communities have been sounding this alarm for decades. I know, it's been something that's been talked about in a lot of communities for a long time. But I think the momentum behind these bills, where we can actually bring a bill like this to the floor, this is the first time that that's happened. At least I know I'm new to the legislature, but I've heard police reform is one of those things that people can only take as much as they can absorb, and it's an incremental process. We're making transformational changes this year in our police bills that would not even have been allowed to come to the floor in previous years. And so I think because of what we saw with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and obviously locally with Manuel Ellis and Jesse Saray, and all just this year, there's a lot of momentum behind it. And people want accountability. I just read a number the other day that since I-940 has been put into law, and that was 2 years ago as of Monday, there's been 100 deaths at the hands of police in our state and only one prosecution. And out of that 100 deaths, 89 people of color. So that just tells you, just behind the data, that there's still issues, and this is a evolving issue that we must address year by year and continue to get closer to justice.
And for some people that are against this bill, one of the big things that they talked about was some of this equipment is used to protect ports and critical infrastructure, airports. What do you have to say to those people taking away some of what they're calling resources to protect lives in these ports and in these airports?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I have had some tough conversations with port police and different folks, and I think that we have to really feel like that we're providing them the tools that they need. That's why I said the less lethal alternatives. There's going to be a fiscal cost to a bill like this, because we're going to have to provide some of those less lethal alternatives that community is asking for to these police officers that don't have it right now. And so that's going to be a thing we're going to have to figure out as a state. However, I do think that, in a sense like that, we want to provide that for officers, and community feels safer. We've heard they feel safer with different alternatives than what is being described in this list. There will be provisions for, again, certain circumstances where, there's a life or death situation, or, in terms of the port police, if they're protecting, certain things that other police don't. There will be provisions in this bill to allow for that, but not for everything that they want. And I think, again, some people just don't want to see any changes, and I think that's just not acceptable this year. We're going to have to see some changes, but do it in a way that makes sense and still keeps public safety as the first priority. So this bill is still, once it gets to the floor, although it's got through the committee, there's going to be some amendments people will see that they probably will agree with in terms of allowing some provisions. However, certain things we're just not going to gonna agree on. But I think at least this gets us a little closer.
Is there anything that you won't budge on with this bill, with this portion of the bill?
For this portion, I think anything armed, again, armed vehicles, armed helicopters, I just probably can't see myself budging on that. I think the same for, unfortunately, for grenade launchers and machine style weapons and assault rifles that are above a certain caliber. I don't think we'll be budging on. And then also the LRADs is something that we saw with the demonstrations, and probably won't be budging on that either. But I think there's other parts of the bill where we could see at least a little bit of provisions on. So I'm hoping, like the Bearcat issue, that's something that you brought up. I'm talking with other representatives about that now. Do we allow for that specific style vehicle to be used or not? And then in what cases do we allow it for? So there is some discussion about that. Same with the making a statement around the suppressors versus the silencers. But I think a lot of the components of the bill will remain in place, and we'll just have to make some provisions for certain situations or officers.
And real quick, just talk about the back end of this bill. If it were to be signed by the governor, everybody would have to get rid of everything by the 31st of 2022, I believe. Correct.
2022 is currently what we have in the bill.
Okay. So if they can't give some of the equipment back to the program because it was purchased through a third party, would the taxpayers be paying to destroy this equipment?
No, not to destroy it. So there is a similar to the State Patrol when we had to get rid of guns that were found at the scene of crimes. There is a space for storing this equipment at the state level, but it takes up space, it takes up storage, and it could only be temporary. So I think that we'll make sure that there's a process that works. I will say that this bill did not go through the Appropriations Committee. There was no major fiscal note for this bill. It went straight to rules, and hopefully it's the floor. So I'm hoping we're not going to have the costs that were first kind of thought of when this bill was dropped, and I think it's going to be a lot less expensive than a lot of the departments have said or might think, because there's opportunities to store it. And also the 1033 program, you can give it back at any time. It's something that's not talked about as well. That equipment can be given back at any time, and so I think we'll be able to figure this out and make sure that it gets done in a good timeline.
So would it just be stored somewhere in the state, not destroyed necessarily?
Yeah, not destroyed, but just stored somewhere in the state, and just not at the departments where it's at their disposal.
Okay, so is that portion going to be taken out of the bill then, since it does say or destroy the equipment?
I don't think so, because I think at some point we mainly made that part because if a department decides that they're not going to comply with the bill, or then the state would have the authority to destroy that equipment. And so I think that it's still something we'll keep in there just for that reason.
Okay. Is there anything else that you want to add about this bill? I'll be talking to our local sheriff and chief here in a couple hours, and obviously they're fully against this bill. Is there anything that you would want to say to these law enforcement agencies?
I think, in talking with law enforcement, one thing I have heard is this idea that we just want everyone to feel safe. We just want everyone to feel like they are safe in their community, and police community relationships are essential to their work. And so, I would just say, think of it through a different lens. And I don't think they can really comprehend the fact that some members of our community don't feel safe with this equipment in place, or with police coming into the community with this equipment. I've heard at public testimony over and over, well, if something happened in your community and police arrived with this equipment, you'd be happy that they were there. And personally, I probably would not. I mean, I just think it would escalate the situation if I saw police coming in to a dangerous situation with a lot of this equipment, because of the fact that a lot of folks that look like me have had bad encounters and innocent folks have been killed. And I think that they just can't really comprehend that. So try to think of it through a different lens. Are you actually talking to members of your community that don't look like you? And what are they saying to you about your presence in the community? That's just something that I would say. And I try to do the same when I talk to law enforcement and put myself in a different space where I can, get their perspective. And, that's why, little by little, we're looking at this bill and we're figuring out the ways that work for everyone. Another major component is the canine use of apprehending suspects. And that's, been discussed ad nauseum and will continue to be till it gets to the floor. So I think there's a lot of components of the bill that we will see change, but others that we just will not compromise on. And hopefully we get to a point where everyone feels at least accepts the bill, that, the intent is to make our communities safer and to make our communities feel safer.
Well, I think that's everything that I have, unless there's anything else that you can think of that you wanted to add.
I don't think so.
All right, let me just stop recording real quick. That way I don't lose